morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Spa Sisters podcast with Julie Wren and myself, Carly Chamberlain. We are here today with Tor Njamo. No, that's not how you say it, is it? Tor, can you please introduce yourself so we get the right pronunciation?
I actually think you did a really good job there. It's like you did it okay. It's totally fine. Anyway, my name is Tor Njamo. I am a Norwegian healer living in London. I work across quite a few different sort of spiritual practices, which I'm sure we will delve into during this episode. Just incredibly happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tor. We've been excited to get you on our podcast for a while now. We've had you on our radar, believe it or not, because I have seen some activity on social media, on LinkedIn, with you working in and around the hospitality and spa sector. You've definitely turned some heads, I think, and your work is really impacting people in a positive way. So we are really curious. We would like to know, you say you're from Norway, which in my mind, I think of beautiful nature, very connected, very intuitive people. What inspired you? Did you have a background in your life that inspired you to take this spiritual path?
Thank you for asking. And I do think that the sort of nature concept scenery of Norway is very apt because if you've ever been to Oslo, it's only like sort of 20 minutes on the tram from like central Oslo and you're like in the middle of the forest. So although Oslo is a city, it's very close to the ocean. Like I just said, it's very close to the forest. And I used to go like every winter, I used to go skiing. There's a saying which is that Norwegians are born with skis on their feet, basically. I mean, I wouldn't say that's true for everybody. I'm actually a terrible skier, but I enjoy it because it's sort of like out in the cold, it's dark outside, but there's something about that which is quite nice. So
Love
where
it.
did my sort of spiritual inspiration start from? So I'm very lucky and very grateful. My grandmother, my belated grandmother, was a spiritual clairvoyant medium back home in Norway. So I was very lucky that whenever I went to visit her during summer, she introduced me to like crystals and tarot cards and meditation and spirit guides and she had a very sort of grounded and sensible approach to this space. I'm actually going to show you. So this is my only heirloom of my grandmother. Everything else disappeared, but
Oh,
this was her tarot deck, and it's
oh,
actually the only tarot deck I have, and it's also the only tarot deck that I use. I feel
wow.
very connected to this, and I do wonder. I always think to myself, like, if I ever lose this for some reason or another, will I get another deck, or will from that on time or that on place, will I only sort of use my more sort of intuitive, psychic, clairvoyant abilities to do my work, basically? So far, this is taking up a huge part of my practice and my life and the way that I approach my sessions. But I do wonder at one point whether these will disappear. Who knows? The universe may have other plans. Yeah, I feel very grateful to my grandmother, and she had a very sort of grounded approach to spirituality. We did spend actually quite a lot of time together in nature,
Okay.
which I really always enjoyed. I think what's quite fun about my grandmother is that she wasn't actually that zen, nor did she actually look after herself that much. I think sort of like a contemporary view of spiritual quote unquote people is like healthy, cleansed yoga, like purity, basically.
Yeah.
Like grandmother, like she liked alcohol, she liked her pizza, like she didn't go to the gym. Um, but she was
Love it.
excellent at what she did, right? Which I always think is quite funny that she was such a contradiction and sort of like a trailblazer of anyone and anybody else in that space, basically. Which I always think is so funny when people talk to me about, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's probably not
Mm,
true. It's like, it's just
mm,
my grandmother was amazing and
yeah.
she didn't do any of those things, which so I feel like I've had a quite a well-rounded introduction to the
Mm.
space.
That is so wonderful that you say that because I think now we are experiencing a very kind of a level of seriousness, like real
Mm,
overly seriousness around spirituality, wellness, yoga. You know, everyone's got to be like 100% on top form all the time, otherwise they feel like a fraud. You know, but it's like you
mm,
say, it's not. It doesn't have to be like that. And actually, in that
mm,
in itself is inauthentic. So if you're not being authentic, you know, and sort of following these natural responses and reactions, you can't possibly be coming from a real place. Yeah.
mm,
Great that
mm.
you've highlighted that. I think that's a huge thing in our industry. So that's great. So why London? Why did you want to come to London? If you sound like you had the perfect childhood, the
Oh, and
perfect
actually that's
environment.
actually so far from the truth. Basically,
Oh,
my
really?
oh
Okay.
yeah, my childhood was riddled with trauma and
Oh
chaos and
gosh.
instability, which is also a very sort of interesting contradiction to Norway. I mean, I think Norway is a great country. It has done amazing things in terms of like inclusivity and equality, and living of standard is like highest in the world. So I think that's
Mhm.
amazing. I think my family was probably one of the few poorer ones in many ways. You know, when I was 6 years old, my house that I lived in burned up to the ground, and we were basically homeless for like 6 months. My mother always struggled with her finances, and my parents got divorced. And I was very young, and I was also bullied for quite a long time. So I actually experienced quite a lot of trauma through my childhood.
Wow.
However, I do think that my grandmother was a good stabilizer in that. I also think that she opened a door in my mind
Mm.
to know that that's sort of like a part of my journey.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the things that I've tried to come to terms with, and it sort of comes back and forth because we're human beings, but I was in a gong bath, as you are, on Saturday, and I sometimes have this thought in my mind, which is, oh, I wish my parents were someone else. Like they weren't able to take care of me in the way that I needed. However, it's actually not true. My parents were exactly who they needed to be to
Yeah.
get me to the place where I am today. And that's sort of
Absolutely.
that's the flip side of that, and I think it's really important to be able to, I don't know, like change, transform, like augment that thinking in the moment and be really quite
Mm.
aware of that. So actually one of the reasons why I moved to London was actually to just I had to leave basically because I could see that if I didn't leave, I wouldn't be able to break the pattern of what my sort of parents and siblings and so on and so forth, the path that they were on, basically. So the
Okay.
reason why I moved originally was to get that distance.
Hmm.
I've also always loved English. For some reason, I just took to that language quite easily. I always thought I would move to America, but because of like student loans and stuff like that, that wasn't possible at the time. But I also think that, again, like I was led here for a reason. I really like the energy in the ground. There's something quite psychically sort of potent. I know a lot of people
Hmm.
feel England and the United Kingdom is like quite dark and sort of down, but actually, I think there's loads of like psychic, spiritual energy in the ground, which is really, really fascinating. And
Wow.
it's also here where I met my spiritual teacher, Ines, who I've been working with for like over 10 years, and we've had a very close relationship. And again, she's the person, sort of after my grandmother, who was able to like really push me, or not push me, but like guide me
I
into
love it.
the level that I am now. So again, I think I was brought here for a reason. And also this like quote unquote spiritual industry doesn't really exist to the same extent in Norway. I'm sure it's sort of, I think meditation and so on and so forth is like coming more towards the surface. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to do what I do there in the way that I'm doing it right now, basically.
Right. Wow. So I think that leads us on to our next question, Julie.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. So, I mean, this path that you've been on, I mean, how did it take you into the corporate world and the hospitality world? I mean, that's quite a different route to take.
Yeah, sure.
Explain that for us.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I actually worked in a corporate for, well, so after uni, I worked as a lecturer at university for about 3 years, teaching digital design, which is what I always thought I would do before stepping into this space, which is true, that is exactly what I did. However, I thought I would become some sort of art director for ad agency for about 20 years. And then when I always imagined that when I got into my 50s, that's when I would sort of step into the space. But we are here 20 years earlier, and the universe clearly had other plans. And then I worked for a tech ed company part-time for 3 years, where I mostly looked after their sort of learning and development programs. I was in charge of like delivering and managing their L&D program, which is, so it's like, it's always been about people. It's always been about teaching and holding space and guiding people sort of gently towards personal and spiritual growth. And then almost 2 years ago now, it's about just about now, isn't it? Just looking at the date. I was told amongst a third of the rest of the company that we were made redundant, as it happens. And at the time, I had some money stowed away. And as you both know, I'm sure you both know, redundancy in England isn't amazing. It's not one of the positives of this country, to put it mildly. But I just thought to myself, I'm just going to give it a go. I've started building up a good client base, and immediately when that was done, I just started researching, putting myself out there, talking to quite a lot of people, quite a lot of different people. I'd already been doing some work at the Mandrake Hotel, which has a really good spiritual offering. And then I was very fortunate to be embraced by Eleanor at Montcalm East. She brought me in. And then I've started delivering one-to-one readings and one-to-one healing sessions there. I've been working with them. Also been working with I can never say it right. It's this Western London City. I think that's the way around it. I was corrected once I was there. It's like it's the other way around, Tor. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, the
So
Western, yeah.
Western City, London City, I think. And I mean, that's a beautiful hotel. Again, Jenny, who works there, the spa director there, has been amazing to me. And I've been doing one-to-one and group sessions there as well. Been also working at quite a few different private membership clubs in London. So I've been working at the Other House, been working at the Grout Show, the Ministry. So I've been sort of somehow managed to wiggle myself into the hospitality space in London, which I think is really interesting because it's an industry which still is in its infancy, I think, in the sense of having a spiritual offering. Obviously, it's been around for forever, but in the sense of its spiritual offering, it's still in its infancy. And it's been cool to have been able to sort of spearhead a bit of that, I guess. And now you're beginning to see that more and more places are starting to embrace having a more spiritual offering on their spa menu and just menu in general.
Yeah, I mean, this is really fascinating. But how do you make that step? How do you get people to have that buy-in? I mean, there must be certain challenges around that, with people hearing the word spirituality and like, oh, that, you know, what's that going to be like? So tell us how that works with getting over those hurdles and getting people to have buy-in.
Sure. So it's obviously a communication piece. It is a communication piece around how to. It's like the question is, how does one communicate something which is so ephemeral in many ways, and then make that tangible? I think the best way is to do by showing, you know. So both with Jenny and with Eleanor, I took them through a journey of what I do and sort of, I suppose, in quote unquote, proved that I could do what I said I could do. So I actually think very often it's about taking people on a journey and proving that the existence of these experiences are real. You know, I think spirituality, psychicness, tarot cards, it does come with some history, and does come with some sort of, oh, this is so woo-woo, basically. I do think that one of the perhaps benefits that I have is that, aside from that, I wear a crystal necklace and have a bit long hair now. I don't quote unquote look your sort of typical spiritual person. And I think that in so many ways maybe leans in my favor. However, I also know a lot of people who's like, they want the stuff that is the most far out. So I also think it's about meeting people sort of where they are. But I think it's the best way is to just have opportunities to show people what it's all about, and then they'll be like, ah, I can feel it, or yes, that resonates.
So what are what are people actually getting out of this in terms of their personal development, personal growth, or overcoming problems? I mean, is that something that is you need to do that more than once, or how does it work in terms of that
Yeah.
connection?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of tarot readings, I don't really recommend that people do that more than like 2, 3 times a year. I realize that some people can get quite addicted to it, right? They can get quite enthralled in like
Yeah.
I want to see a reader like every week, or and so I think that feeling can become quite addictive. And I think that in so many ways it's the reader's responsibility to actually go, you don't really need a reading more than 2 to 3 times a year. How I approach a reading, I mean, some people approach readings mostly in like what they would say is a therapeutical way, in a sort of therapeutical approach, not therapy, obviously, but in a more sort of therapeutical approach, whilst you have other people who leans much more into sort of the fortune telling, clairvoyance, seeing the future, etc. I probably dance a dance somewhere in between, because I think what's always really important to me is that when somebody leaves a reading, they feel really, really, really empowered to make choices for themselves, not because I said X, Y, and Z is going to happen, right?
Mhm.
It's really key for me that they have arrived at some place within themselves where they feel more confident and reassured that actually whatever hurdle or opportunity or challenge that's coming up, they can overcome that through their own decision making. What I do in my readings is that it's very coachy, it's very sort of conversational. However, I also do bring forward, oh, I see this and this and this opportunity might come up, and this is how you can approach that to glean the most benefit from that, basically. Sometimes messages from past ones comes through, and I also share that as a way of sort of feeling that there is really something more to life than what we can touch with our sort of known senses. So that's a reading. In terms of a healing session, what I do there, which I arguably is like energy healing, which includes guided meditation, a bit of breath work, crystals. I also do a bit of a reading during my healing sessions so that I can sort of give some feedback of what I'm picking up, so give them some guidance about how to move forward. Most of the time, a healing session is really also about people dropping into this deep altered state of consciousness, because in that space you can really begin to shift perhaps some of those unhelpful thought patterns that you've been inhabiting for a long time. And it's really about gently beginning to shift that over time. And when it comes to a healing session, you can do that every week if you like to. It's a bit like a massage. That's a bit different to a reading. So yeah, as long as people feel much calmer when they leave, and that again, that they feel that something energetically has shifted within themselves, I'm really happy.
Lovely.
Wow.
I mean, do you feel that there has been no resistance along the way to the idea of bringing this into the hospitality sector? I mean, you say that you kind of like show by doing, but have you seen sort of like other kinds of resistance, and why do you think that could be?
Sure. So as you were asking that question, I was like, I think it's interesting though, because I do think that the people who have actually come back to me or responded to my emails are the people who's already quite open and curious, right? Whilst the people who are perhaps more resistant, they don't actually answer, or they don't get back to me. So I haven't experienced that much resistance per se. There's a couple of people who have said to me, oh, that doesn't fit our sort of where we're heading or our kind of offering. Because I also do think that, people are still a bit of sort of afraid reputationally. Because there's I don't exactly understand, like there's seemingly some sort of reputational risk
Mhm.
with this kind of space, because there will also be practitioners and actors who aren't always behaving ethically, for example. So I think perhaps one of the things to communicate that we have to really highlight is sort of ethical practitioners who approaches their job in ethical ways and also clearly understand their boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, at the end of the day, I am not a therapist. I'm a trained coach. I'm a trained healer. I have supervision, like I've done loads of things. But at the end of the day, I'm not like a psychotherapist, right? It's about also being really able to understand the boundaries of my offering.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Tor, so what I'm hearing is that we are needing advocates in our industry, in the spa industry, to really talk about this. You know, you mentioned Jenny, you mentioned Ellie. You know, they are the advocates really. And I see this being really popular going forward in our industry, because I do feel like there has been a universal shift and people are much more open and sort of receptive to things that are a little bit outside of the norm, the box, you know. Where can people reach you? What's your website address or your social media handles?
Yeah, sure. So Tor Njamo, which is I do realize that it's hard to, so it's TORNJAMO, and it's the same thing on Instagram, and it's just .com, which is my website. I also run weekly in-person sessions if people want to at different studios around London. And actually, what's quite interesting in London, especially, is that there's quite a lot of sort of meditation, breathwork, sound healing studios that are now proliferating around town. And in LA, for example, there's been many for many years. Whilst, for example, now you got Remind, where I work every week. There's a place called Astoria London, where I work every week. There's a place called Fire and Alchemy. And there's also a new space called Sacred Tones opening later in May. And I work at all of those different places. So I'm very lucky to have been able to do that. And I'm also quite fortunate in the sense that I also get to work with quite a lot of like corporate brands, which has been really cool. Like working with places like, and actually Nike is probably the brand which has been most open to me sort of bringing in a bit of more like spiritual language. Going to do some work with Tom Ford, and they're also open to bring in a bit of like more spiritual language. Although I think, you know, how I also talk about it in many ways is like it's all vibrations, right? So it's like vibrational. One of the, I don't know if anyone else is using this, but one of the terms that I'm coining is like vibrational well-being.
Love it.
Which I think can be a very,
If you're
very
watching,
nice.
don't steal that.
Don't steal it.
Don't
Please. I
steal
mean,
Tor's idea.
I think high tides rises all boats. Is that a saying?
A rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah.
Yes, rising
Well,
tide
there
lifts
you
all
go.
boats. I'm
Yeah.
very much in favor of that. So yeah, the sort of the thing that I'm creating, I suppose, as my offering is like vibrational well-being. Because I think that I don't think it's wrong to take out maybe some of those more spiritual phrases. And I think coming back to the communication piece, you know, it is the words that you use. For me, I'm quite agnostic in the words that you use, as long as you end up where you're meant to end up, basically. So using terms such as vibrational well-being, I think can be a very nice way to could phrase it slightly differently, but it does the same thing, basically.
I heard this weekend somebody talk about an audio analgesic.
Audio analgesic?
So like a, yeah, cool. So using music and sound as a painkiller. That was brilliant.
That's brilliant.
Well, I mean, that's sound healing though, right?
Yeah,
that's sound healing.
Another way of saying sound healing. It's an audio analgesic.
Yeah,
yeah,
and
it's
massage is my medicine. I use that a lot. Massage is my medicine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I often say that what I do is like a massage for the mind, right? When I use my voice to guide people through that visual experience and also sort of do my vibrational singing and really take people into that real depth of presence is a massage for the mind.
Great. So just one more question, Tor, which I know is a bit off script, but I'm really curious. When we press stop on our record button today, how do you preserve your own energy? What do you do in your kind of own time to kind of rebuild? And because you sound like you're a busy person.
Yeah, so I am one of those people who do meditate for about 2 hours every day. I don't have children. I don't have a partner. So, I mean, that's obviously makes it lots easier to spend that much time meditating. So I do spend about 2 hours every day meditating, and that looks like 20 minutes of breath work, 20 minutes of just silence, and 20 minutes of visualization. So that's sort of my practice twice a day. I try to go for lots of walks in nature without listening to anything. I think that's another practice of going inwards, try to get as much sleep as I can. Um, I actually don't really read that much news. I try to stay off the news as much as I can because I don't think it's helpful. Obviously, I listen to one news podcast every week to like stay on top of current events, but aside from that, it's like zero. What more do I do? Yeah, I think just being really mindful overall about what we nourish ourselves with in terms of food, sleep, content, and people. I think the people that you spend time with is really key because I am someone who clearly can change my perspective internally. But at the end of the day, if someone in your environment is constantly anxious, worried, has a hectic energy, we're human beings at the end of the day, and that will still impact you. So just making sure that you are in environments, or making sure for myself at least, that I am in an environment which is like, whew, sort of
Yeah.
overall calm and soothing, that helps me to stay somewhat still.
Thank you, Tor. Thank you so
Tor.
much for your time.
My pleasure.
If you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions, please email us at sparsisterspodcast@gmail.com or connect with us at Spar Sisters Podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. And this was a great interview. Thanks so much for your time today. And we wish you so much success.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.